It began as a tiny regional film. No money, no safety nets, no stars. Just a scorched Texas sun, a borrowed chainsaw, and a crew pushed so far past exhaustion, they stopped acting and started unraveling on camera. What happened inside that collapsing farmhouse should have been a disaster. Instead, it became one of the most frightening, influential, and strangely human horror films ever made. A movie stitched together from sweat, accidents, improvisation, and pure survival instinct. And tonight, we're diving into the deepest, strangest corners of that legend. And stay with me until the end, because there's one bonus fact waiting for you that's too wild to skip. These are 20 weird, twisted facts about 1974's The Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Number 1. Every great horror story has a secret villain lurking just out of frame. And for the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, that villain might not have been Leatherface at all. It might have been the mob. Not officially, not on any contract you can easily find, but in the whispered spaces of the film's history, something darker seeps through. When the broke and exhausted production team needed a distributor, a company called Bryanston stepped in. A company quietly steered by Louis Butchie Pereno, son of a man tied to the Colombo crime family. Suddenly, this scrappy Texas indie wasn't just a film. It was a product moving through channels that had nothing to do with cinema and everything to do with money. The deal looked like a lifeline, but it felt more like a handshake in a dim alley. Fast cash, vague promises, and a future no one could fully predict. The movie took off. Money poured in, theaters filled with screams, and yet somehow the profits evaporated, slipping into the same shadows that Bryanston came from. Lawsuits couldn't retrieve what had vanished. The company folded like a ghost, leaving behind nothing but questions and a suspicion that Leatherface wasn't the only one carving things up behind the scenes. Number 2. Most people credit Ed Gein for Leatherface, and yes, Gein's crimes cast a long, grotesque shadow over American horror. But the seed that grew into the film's most haunting image didn't come from a serial killer. It came from a quiet confession over casual conversation. Tobe Hooper once spoke with a doctor he knew, a man who told him a story from his med school days with an unsettling calm. During a routine cadaver dissection, he said he and a few classmates peeled the skin from a corpse's face and wore it as a Halloween mask. Not a joke mask, not a prank, an actual human face, stretched and fitted like a grotesque costume. Hooper never forgot it. The image burrowed into him, resurfacing years later when he needed a villain whose horror felt handmade, intimate, wrong in a way no Hollywood monster could match. Leatherface wasn't born from folklore or tabloid headlines. He was born from a story told too casually, a glimpse into real darkness delivered with a doctor's steady voice. Number 3. Great horror doesn't always come from dark forests or abandoned houses. Sometimes it's born in the fluorescent nightmare of holiday shopping. One December afternoon in 1972, Tobe Hooper found himself trapped in a department store during a Christmas rush. Elbows jabbing, children screaming, shoppers stampeding for sales like hungry animals. Overheated, overwhelmed, and drifting toward panic, Hooper paused near a display of power tools. There, in the middle of the chaos, he stared at a row of chainsaws glistening under the lights. And in that strange moment, a thought crossed his mind. Sharp, simple, a little terrifying. I could clear a path through this crowd with one of those. It wasn't a threat, it was an epiphany, a flash of dark fantasy in a moment of sensory overload. 30 minutes later, back home, Hooper began sketching what would become one of the most iconic horror films ever made, not from a nightmare, not from a murder case, from Christmas shopping, the most relatable madness of all. Number 4, some scenes in horror films feel too real, too raw, too visceral to be acting. And in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, one of them truly wasn't. During the infamous dinner sequence, when Grandpa leans in to suck blood from Sally's finger, the script called for a simple effect: a dulled blade, a hidden tube, a little fake blood.
Make him stop doing it.
But after almost 20 straight hours of shooting in suffocating heat, nothing worked. The tube clogged, the blood wouldn't pump. Everyone was exhausted, delirious, and desperate to finish. Gunnar Hansen, buried under sweat, makeup, and the weight of Leatherface, made a split-second decision. Without warning, he peeled the tape off the blade and gave Marilyn Burns a real shallow cut, letting actual blood drip for the shot. It wasn't malice. It was survival. One take, one moment, one genuine wound. And in that moment, the line between acting and agony vanished, leaving behind a scene that still feels disturbingly alive. Number 5. The most shocking part of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre isn't the carnage. It's how close the cast came to the real thing. The chainsaw wasn't rubber. It wasn't dulled. It was a fully functioning tool, revved to maximum power because the production couldn't afford anything else. During the chase scenes, Gunnar Hansen swung it inches from Marilyn Burns' face, trusting himself not to trip on the uneven dirt roads. But the closest call happened during the final moments. Leatherface tripping and falling with the blade roaring beneath him. Hansen said the saw missed his body by mere centimeters. One wrong angle, one split second, and the production would have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became one of the most iconic shots in horror history, born from a mixture of luck, recklessness, and a film crew that simply didn't have the budget to fake danger. Number 6. Most horror houses get bulldozed, condemned, or quietly forgotten, but the Chainsaw House? It became a place where you can order brunch. The ramshackle farmhouse, once filled with bones, sweat, heat, and whispered dread, didn't rot in a field. Instead, it was carefully lifted off its foundations, moved across Texas to Kingsland, and restored plank by plank into something no one expected. A charming little restaurant, first called Grand Central Cafe, now updated to Hooper's. It's the kind of place where sunlight hits the floorboards just right and the coffee smells comforting. But if you know, you know. Fans walk through the doors and instantly see the ghosts of production. The cramped dinner table, the corners where actors nearly fainted from heat, the rooms that once held rotting props and frayed nerves. Yet now, people sit where Leatherface once stood, eating pancakes, taking selfies, and laughing at the idea of horror history under their feet. It's surreal. A cinematic slaughterhouse transformed into a place where the only screams come from hot skillets. Number 7. Low-budget filmmaking sometimes demands uncomfortable resourcefulness, but Texas Chain Saw took it to a new level. Because the script demanded bone art, decayed animals, and grotesque set dressing, production designer Robert Burns began sourcing real skeletons from wherever he could. The local veterinarian even offered up corpses scheduled for disposal. They boiled carcasses behind the house, stripped bones, and arranged them into disturbing sculptures that still unsettle viewers today. The smell was indescribable. Hot fat, decay, and chemicals simmering in the Texas sun. Crew members gagged while arranging props, and the actors were never warned which pieces were real and which weren't. Marilyn Burns once reached for a prop only to realize it still had soft tissue attached. The realism of the Sawyer home wasn't Hollywood trickery. It was handcrafted nightmare fuel, sculpted from the things most people couldn't even look at. Number 8. You know a film has struck a nerve when entire nations decide their citizens simply shouldn't see it. Across the globe, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Ireland, Brazil, Chile, and others. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre hit walls of censorship, not because it was splattered in gore, but because its intensity was too much. That relentless screaming, that grimy realism, that dinner scene that feels like a trap with no exit. It wasn't the blood, it was the feeling of watching something primal and wrong, something society wasn't ready for. While American teens whispered about midnight screenings, horror fans overseas traded illicit tapes, passing them hand to hand like smuggled artifacts. And every ban, every refusal, every not suitable for public viewing only deepened the film's power. Chainsaw wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a global taboo, a piece of cinema that governments hoped would disappear. Instead, it became a legend whispered across borders. Number 9. When a movie gets added to the National Film Registry, it usually means prestige, reverence, maybe a quiet nod from scholars who sip coffee over restored film reels. But the Texas Chain Saw Massacre didn't sneak in through the back door of history. It kicked it down with a roaring engine and a cloud of dust. In 2024, the US government officially decided that this sweaty, sunburned, bone-rattling fever dream was culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Imagine that. Film once whispered about, banned, condemned, blamed for moral decay, now sharing archival shelf space with Citizen Kane and Casablanca. The very movie censors once refused to touch was suddenly a national treasure. It's the kind of poetic reversal that feels scripted, like the universe waited 50 years just to deliver the punchline. And somewhere out there, Leatherface, chainsaw buzzing, apron flapping in the heat, finally became part of America's permanent record, a nightmare so iconic the government had no choice but to protect it forever. Number 10. Gunnar Hansen didn't just slip into Leatherface. He studied him like a behavioral scientist preparing a case study. Hansen researched mental disabilities to create a physicality that wasn't monstrous by intent, but by innocence, imagining Leatherface as someone who mimics the world without understanding it. But something changed on set. The heat, the chaos, the mask glued to his face for up to 12 hours a day, it warped the performance into something far more violent. Hansen has said the mask worked like sensory deprivation. He could barely see, barely breathe, barely hear. And in that isolation, Leatherface evolved into something primal. His movements became more unpredictable, more aggressive. His famous door slam moment wasn't rehearsed. It was an instinctive act, born from frustration and suffocation. What began as a childlike imitation became one of horror's most chilling embodiments of pure, directionless anger. Number 11. Most horror icons wear a single mask. One identity, one nightmare. But Leatherface was never that simple. His masks weren't props. They were personalities. Each one was a doorway into a different version of the man behind the skin. The crew crafted 3 distinct faces: the killing mask, raw and stitched, used when he was the family's butcher; the old lady or grandma mask, worn during domestic chores as he shuffled around like a twisted matriarch; and the pretty woman mask, complete with makeup, eyelashes, and a distorted idea of beauty, worn during the infamous dinner scene. Tobe Hooper described it as Leatherface having no identity at all, only the ones he borrowed. So when he changed masks, he wasn't changing costumes, he was changing souls. Each face, a new mood, a new instinct, a new form of chaos. And once you see that, every scene feels like you're watching multiple monsters trapped in the same body. Number 12. Every ensemble has that one character who gets on everyone's nerves. But on the set of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, that character wasn't just Franklin. It was Paul Partain becoming Franklin. From day one, Partain made a choice. Full method, no breaks, no off switch. He stayed in that anxious, whining, trapped in his own head performance 24 hours a day. Between takes, he didn't relax, didn't joke, didn't step outside himself. He complained, fussed, snapped, and rolled through scenes with the same raw irritation that made Franklin unforgettable on screen. But off screen, it wore everyone down. Marilyn Burns eventually stopped talking to him. Crew members avoided him like a moving storm cloud. Even Gunnar Hansen, a man wearing human skin masks for a living, admitted Franklin was the only character he felt genuinely happy to kill. And yet, Partain's commitment paid off. His performance wasn't crafted, it was endured by him and everyone around him. That tension bleeds into the film. A character so real, he became unbearable in the best possible horror movie way. Number 13. It's almost funny looking back. This tiny, grimy, low-budget nightmare filmed in the Texas heat, stitched together with sweat and desperation, ended up becoming one of the most profitable horror films in history. The budget hovered somewhere around $60,000 to $140,000, depending on who you ask. But the impact wasn't up for debate. In its first year alone, the film pulled in millions, eventually climbing to more than $30 million worldwide. Drive-ins filled with screaming teenagers. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Even with shady distributors carving away profits behind closed doors, the film still became a financial monster too big to ignore. Chainsaw didn't succeed in spite of its limitations. It succeeded because of them. Its raw edges, its unpolished fear, its documentary grit made it feel like something forbidden. The box office didn't just reward it, it validated it. A tiny movie made in the middle of nowhere suddenly stood shoulder to shoulder with studio giants, the chainsaw roaring louder than Hollywood could ever have imagined. Number 14. You'd think starring in one of the most profitable horror films ever made would change your life, pay your bills, maybe even buy you a new car. But for the Chainsaw cast, it barely bought lunch. With no budget to offer real salaries, most actors signed contracts promising a share of profits instead. It sounded reasonable at the time, until half the film's ownership was sliced off before they ever saw a dime, and the distributors started reporting laughably low numbers. Some actors waited months for payment. One actor opened a check for $47.07, barely enough to replace the outfit he sweat through during filming. Others received nothing at all. They had endured unbearable heat, collapsing props, near misses with a live chainsaw, and walked away broke. The irony is almost cinematic. A film about exploitation ended up exploiting the very people who gave it life. And still, none of them quit. They survived the production, even if the paychecks didn't. Number 15. Before found footage had a name, before shaky cameras and grainy realism became a genre, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre already felt like a crime scene someone shouldn't have filmed. Shot on rough 16mm stock, lit by whatever the sun or a bare bulb could manage, the movie didn't look produced. It looked confiscated. No score to guide you, no glossy edits to reassure you, just raw chaos, handheld unease, and the sensation that something had gone horribly wrong while the camera kept rolling. Hooper and co-writer Kim Henkel understood something powerful. If audiences believed the story might be real, their fear would double before the first scream. So they borrowed from the headlines of Ed Gein, sprinkled in Americana Dread, and crafted one of the most effective hoaxes in horror history. Viewers in 1974 had never seen anything like it. Some whispered it wasn't a film at all, but a recovered document the authorities didn't want to explain. And that was the brilliance. Hooper created a world that felt unscripted, unstable, almost illegal to witness. Years later, when Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity arrived, the blueprint had already been carved into the dirt. Chainsaw didn't just influence found footage, it predicted it, like a grim warning of where horror was heading next. Number Number 16. The dinner sequence in Chainsaw is legendary, not just for what's on screen, but for what it did to the people filming it. It wasn't one long shoot. It was a collapse in slow motion. John Dugan, playing Grandpa, endured 10 grueling hours in prosthetics, sealed under layers of latex while the Texas heat turned the set into a furnace. He refused to sit through that makeup process twice, so Tobe Hooper made a decision. They would shoot the entire sequence, every scream, every angle, every grotesque beat, in one horrifying marathon. For about 27 hours, actors sat in sweltering temperatures surrounded by real animal bones and rotting meat. Lights blasted like miniature suns. The smell was indescribable. Cast members vomited between takes. Hansen hallucinated, and through it all, cameras rolled, capturing not performance, but pure human breaking point. That's why the scene feels endless, suffocating, unforgettable. It wasn't staged chaos, it was real madness documented on film. Number 17. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre wasn't a symphony, it was a sprint through fire. Film productions usually unfold like a careful orchestration. Weeks of planning, months of shooting, an orchestra of crew members moving in sync. Official accounts argue over the exact number of days, but everyone agrees on one truth. The shoot was insanely short, a whirlwind of exhaustion and chaos crammed into a handful of blistering weeks. Some say closer to 16 days of nonstop filming, while others log it between 28 and 32. Regardless, Tobe Hooper pushed his tiny crew through marathon days that bled into nights, then into mornings again. People slept on floors. Meals were erratic. The sun became a bully, hammering the farmhouse until it felt like the walls were sweating. And through it all, they captured footage that felt jagged and unstable. The kind of energy you can't choreograph. The speed didn't hurt the film. It electrified it. Chainsaw feels breathless because it was breathless. A movie made on borrowed time and frayed sanity, racing toward completion before anyone collapsed. Number 18. If hell had a summer home, it would have looked exactly like the Chainsaw set in 1973. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees inside the cramped farmhouse. The air so thick with humidity and decay, it felt like breathing through a wet rag. There was no air conditioning, no breeze, no relief. Actors wore the same outfits every day because the budget couldn't afford duplicates. And after weeks of sweat, blood, dirt, and fear, those costumes became biological weapons. Real animal bones and real rotting meat decorated the rooms, filling the air with a stench that clung to skin and sanity. There was one bathroom for over 30 people. Crew members fainted. Cast members cried. Everyone was on edge, yet that misery seeped into the film, giving every shot a sense of desperation and sunburnt delirium. Chainsaw didn't just depict madness, it grew from it, cooked in the heat, stitched together out of exhaustion, until the terror on screen matched the suffering behind it. Number 19. Edwin Neal, who played the hitchhiker, delivered one of the film's most disturbing performances, but the real horror, according to him, happened behind the scenes. Neal was a Vietnam veteran, someone who had seen real war, real chaos, real suffering. And yet, he once famously said that shooting the Texas Chain Saw Massacre was worse. He wasn't talking about danger, he meant the conditions. The heat, the stench, the endless hours, the choking air inside the farmhouse. The emotional exhaustion of constantly playing unhinged. At one point, Neal worked 27 hours straight, a marathon that blurred the line between acting and mental collapse. The irony is eerie. A man who survived the jungles of Vietnam found himself pushed to his limit by a tiny horror film in rural Texas. And somehow, all of that anguish found its way into the hitchhiker's manic, unforgettable performance. Number 20. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre doesn't have a traditional musical score. Instead, it breathes. Growls, shrieks, metallic groans. Hooper wanted the film to sound like it was being played on a haunted junkyard. Wayne Bell and Hooper recorded pigs squealing, generators sputtering, metal scraping bone, and then layered everything into a chaotic symphony of unease. There are moments where the audio peaks so harshly, it feels like the film is screaming at you. The industrial ambience wasn't just stylization, it was survival. With no budget for orchestration, they turned the environment into their instrument. Even the final chase is scored with live field recordings layered in frantic loops. The result is a soundscape that feels alive, hostile, and predatory. Long before sound design became an industry buzzword, Chainsaw pioneered a sonic language that rattled audiences to their core. Bonus fact: when the Texas Chain Saw Massacre exploded into the cultural bloodstream, no one, not Hooper, not the cast, not the distributors, realized they had just rewritten the rules of horror. There had been violent films before, but nothing that fused documentary grit, family-based villainy, final girl mythology, and the claustrophobic terror of rural isolation quite like this. The film's success inadvertently created the DNA that later fueled Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and everything that followed. Leatherface wasn't a monster from another dimension. He was someone's neighbor, someone's son, someone shaped by poverty, madness, and isolation. That grounded horror changed the genre forever. With a shoestring budget, unbearable heat, and actors pushed past their limits, the film stumbled its way into history, accidentally gifting the world the slasher template it still worships today. In the end, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre wasn't just a horror film. It was a storm, a chaotic, feverish burst of creativity that reshaped an entire genre and scarred everyone who touched it. A film born from unbearable heat, frayed nerves, real injuries, and a determination so reckless it bordered on myth. And somehow, out of that madness, a masterpiece clawed its way into history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of horror's most twisted productions, hit like, subscribe for more horror cinema breakdowns, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next nightmare. And in the comments, tell me which horror film you want unraveled next.